Baruchim Haboim. Welcome everyone. We're about to begin Be'ezras Hashem together on Daf Lamed Zayin Amud Aleph, 11 lines from the top. The Gemara asked, what is the interpretation of our Mishnah? Does the Mishnah go like Hananya, that's referring to Chazara, returning a pot to the stove, whereby if it has coals in it, then you have to have grufa or ketuma, you have to rake out the coals, or you have to put ashes on the coals, whereby that will then prevent a person from being mechate, from stoking the coals and being over an isur deraisa of havara, kindling a flame on Shabbos, whereby shihiyah, just putting a pot on top of such a flame before Shabbos would be mutter? Or is the Mishnah interpreted like the Chachamim of Chananya, that the Mishnah is speaking about shihiyah, that in order to maintain a pot before Shabbos on a flame that has coals on it, you would have to do grufa ketuma, and kol shekain chazara, you would have to have grufa and ketuma. The Gemara tries to prove one way or the other. He has not been successful so far. Says the Gemara now, Toshma, come in here. The Omar Rabbi Chelboy, Omar Rabbi Chamo, Bar Gurya, Omar Rav, Lo shanu ella al gabo. He makes a statement that it was only taught that you can't put the pot on top of the stove. Sorry, that you can put the pot on top of the stove, but you cannot put it inside of the stove. So the Gemara says, if you want to say that the Mishnah is talking about lahachzir like Chananya, the subject of the Mishnah is chazara, but shehiyah would be mutter, even without gruf or ketuma. Hainu deshani ben toicha al gabo. Then we understand a distinction between toicha and al gabo. That when it comes to chazara, when you return the pot to the stove, then we understand there's a distinction when you're going to return the pot on top of the stove or underneath the stove. So even though grufa and ketuma would have been done, but when you return it and it goes underneath the stove, it looks like you're going to then cook, and that would be osir. But if you're going to learn that the Mishnah is like the Chachamim of Chananya, that's talking about the subject of shihiyah in our Mishnah, maintaining a pot on the flame, Mali toicha, mali al gaba. Once you already took out the coals, let's say you did grufa, so then what's the difference whether you put the pot on top of the stove or inside of the stove? Either way, it would be permissible. Misavris Rabbi Chelba Aresha Koi, asked the Gemara, who said that Rabbi Chelboy meant to speak about the Resha? Aseifa Koi, indeed he's referring to the Seif of our Mishnah. As follows, Ubeis Hillel oimim af machzirin. Beis Hillel says even machzirin is something that is permissible to do when there's grufa and ketuma. On that says Rabbi Chelba, Rabbi Chelba, Rabbi Chama Bar Gurya, Marav, Lo shanu ella al gabo, aval toicha osir. That is only so when it is on top of the kira, on top of the stove, but if you return the pot and put it inside the stove, then it appears that you're going to be cooking, and therefore that is prohibited. So therefore we cannot prove that our Mishnah is like Chananya, because maybe indeed it's like the Chachamim of our Mishnah. Says the Gemara, trying to prove again, Toshma, come in here. Beis kiros hamat imois. There are two side-by-side stoves, twin stoves. Achaz grufa v'ketuma, v'achaz she'ena grufa v'ena ketuma. One stove had grufa or ketuma. Either the coals were taken out, or they were put ashes on top of them in order to be masiach das from using them in the future. Whereas the other stove did not have grufa or ketuma done. So it says mashin in the brisa, mashin al gabe grufa v'ketuma ve'in mashin al she'ena grufa ve'ena ketuma. Therefore, you can go ahead and maintain a pot on the stove that has grufa and ketuma, but not on the stove that does not have grufa and ketuma. Umahein mashin, and what can you go ahead and maintain that stove on? So it's a machloikis. Beis Shammai oimrim v'loy klum, ubeis Hillel chamin avalo tavshil. Beis Shammai says not anything, not even hot water. By the way, this is a different opinion that we saw in the Mishnah, a new opinion. That Beis Shammai said you cannot even maintain a pot of hot water. Ubeis Hillel says a pot of hot water you can, chamin yes, but tavshil not. Okar, if you took off the pot from the flame, divrei hakol lo yachzir. Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir says both Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel said you cannot return the pot. And therefore this is again a new opinion of Rabbi Meir that once again says that when it comes to shehiyah, Beis Shammai is strict to the extent he says that you can't do shehiyah even for a pot of hot water. Whereas Beis Hillel says a pot of hot water, yes, but not a pot of tavshil. Rabbi Yehuda oimer, Beis Shammai oimrim. The Brisa continues in the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda that Beis Shammai oimrim chamin aval lo tavshil, uBeis Hillel oimrim chamin v'tavshil. Rabbi Yehuda says that Beis Shammai says a pot of hot water chamin you could maintain, but when it comes to tavshil not. Whereas Beis Hillel he says both chamin and tavshil. Beis Shammai oimrim noitlin aval lo machzirin. Beis Hillel omrim af machzirin. Beis Shammai, according to Rabbi Yehuda, says you can take off the pot, but you cannot return the pot. Whereas Beis Hillel says you can both take off as well as return the pot. So Gemara now works it out. If you want to say that our Mishnah is talking about the subject of shehiyah like the Chachamim of Chananya, then it's very well. Masnisim Mani, who is the author of our Mishnah? Rabbi Yehuda. It's Rabbi Yehuda who says that when it comes to shehiyah, so long as you did grufa and ketuma, you can put the pot on the fire before Shabbos and do shehiyah and maintain it. Eliyam is lahachzir tnan masnisim mani. But if you want to maintain that it's chananya, that the subject of our Mishnah is chazara, then which of the Tanoim would author our Mishnah? Lo Rabbi Yehuda, v'lo Rabbi Meir, not Rabbi Yehuda nor Rabbi Meir. I Rabbi Meir kashi lebeis Shammai bechada, ulebeis Hillel betarti. If it's according to Rabbi Meir, it will be difficult according to Beis Shammai in regards to Beis Shammai saying that you could go ahead and keep a hot pot of water, a chamin, on the fire, whereas Rabbi Meir says you could not. And according to Beis Hillel, not only does he say that Beis Hillel cannot put a tavshil, but he also says he can't be machzir. So there will be two problems with the opinion of Rabbi Meir. And if Rabbi Yehuda, and if you want to suggest it's Rabbi Yehuda, then kasha grufa v'ketuma. Then it will be a kasha of grufa and ketuma, according to this, because shehiyah does not require grufa and ketuma according to Chananya. Whereas Rabbi Yehuda over here is saying you would require grufa and ketuma to maintain a pot on the stove. The Gemara says, La'olam emalach lahachzir tnan. Really, I can say that the Mishnah is authored by Chananya and is referring to the subject of chazara. V'tana didon sover lo k'Rabbi Yehuda bechada upolig aleh bechada. And our Mishnah ascribes the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda in one aspect, but also argues with him on another aspect. As follows: Sover like Rabbi Yehuda bechado bechamin v'tavshil v'noitlin umachzirin. It agrees with Rabbi Yehuda in one aspect in regards to chamin and tavshil and noitlin umachzirin. Upoligale bechada, however, argues in one aspect the ilutana didon sover lishois. Our Tana, according to Chananya, says when it comes to shehiyah, you don't need to do gufa or ketuma. Whereas Rabbi Yehuda says you do. Rabbi Yehuda says, "Belishois nami goruf v'kotum im iloi loi." So therefore, you cannot prove that our Mishnah is like the Chacham and Rabbi Chananya, because maybe it can also be learned in this brisa to be like Chananya, the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda as well, in one aspect and arguing on the other aspect. Now the Gemara has a new question. Can you take a pot and be soymech, put it next to a kira, next to a stove, but next to the wall of the stove before Shabbos? And we're talking about a kira that was not done grufa or ketuma. Can that be done? Putting a pot inside or on top of such a stove that would not done gufa ketuma is prohibited, but this being soymech, putting the pot next to the stove would be permissible. Or perhaps it's also prohibited, just like putting it inside or on top of a stove. Toshma, come and hear the following proof. Shtei kirois hamat imois, achas grufa v'ketuma, v'achas she'ena grufa v'ketuma. We have two stoves alongside each other. Again, these type of twin stoves. One has grufa and ketuma, the other one does not. Mashin al gabe grufa v'ketuma, v'afakav de kosolik le hevla mi'idach. You can go ahead and put, says the Brisa, the pot on the stove that has grufa and ketuma, even though the stove next to it is going to then give it its hot air, and it's going to then get hot air from that stove into the pot. So it's like you're being soymech. So the Gemara seems to want to prove over here at this point that you can, yes, be soymech a pot next to a stove that did not have grufa and ketuma. However, the Gemara rejects this. Dilma shiny hasam. Maybe over there it's different. The kiven the medallia sholit bo aviro. Since the pot that is on the stove that is grufa and ketuma is elevated, therefore the air that comes from the stove that is not grufa and ketuma is limited in its force, in its heat source that comes into the pot that is on top of the stove that is grufa and ketuma. And therefore it's not like being soymech a pot onto a regular stove which is not grufa and ketuma. Toshma, let's try to bring another proof. Dom Rav Safra Rav Chia kitma v'nislabso. If a stove was kitma, they put some ashes, a layer of ashes on the coals, but afterwards, subsequently, it became relit. It lit itself again. Soimchin lo umekaimin alel. You could put a pot next to the stove, and you can also maintain the pot on the stove. V'noitli mimena, and you can take it off. Umachzirin lo, and you can return it back to the stove. Shma'amina lismach nami kitma in lo kitma lo. We can prove from here that being soymech, to taking a pot and putting it next to such a stove, requires kitma. Like it says over here, it was kitma and then nislabso. Ask the Gemara l'taimeich, according to your reasoning, noitlim mimena diktoni. That which it says, noitlim, that you took from it, kitma in lo kitma loi. Are you going to say that noitlim also requires kitma? And certainly not. You don't require kitma, not gufa or ketuma, to take off a pot that was on a stove. That certainly is mutter without that. Elo tana noitlin mishum machzirin. Rather, you must say that the tana is coming to say noitlin, you take it off, in order to then bring the case of machzirin. Hochanami tana soimchin mishum makaimim. So too, it's coming to say somchim, in order to then bring the case of mashirin, of maintaining the pot on the fire. And therefore you would not have a proof. Ask the Gemara, Hochi Hashta, would that be, is this so? Now, is this true? This would be a good comparison. Hasam over there, Noitlin umachzirin bechad mokomhu. When it comes to Noitlin umachzirin, you're taking out and you're putting it back in the same place. So therefore, Noitlin could be then a subject to then bring about the subject of machzirin. I'm saying Noitlin in order to then get to the case of machzirin, because it goes to the same place. But over here, Tana noitlin mishum machzirin. Over here, would you say he's taking it? Oh, so Tana noitlin mishum machzirin. But Elohacha soimchim bechad mokomhu umekayim bechad mokomhu. When it comes to soimech, the pot that was next to the stove, that's one place, and then Shehiyah is taking the pot and putting it onto another place on top of the stove itself. So it's not a good comparison. So Gemara rejected that and therefore cannot prove either way. My hava Allah. So what is the conclusion of this question that we ask? Can you take a pot and soymech it next to a stove, next to the wall of a stove that was not done gufa or ketuma? Toshma, now the Gemara brings a proof that says specifically and explicitly in the following brisa. Kira shehisikua begefes uve'etzim soymchin lo. If you have a stove that was fueled with gefes or eight and that produces a coal, soimchin lo, you could put a pot next to that stove's wall. Ve'ein mekaymin elim ken gufa ketuma, but you cannot maintain the pot on top of the stove if it was not done gufa ketuma. Gecholin she'omamu. If you have the coals that became diminished, they became weakened, or you put upon those coals small thin pieces of flax, harehu kiketuma. It's like you put ashes on top of it in order to then weaken the strength of these coals. Whereby we see from this brisa quite clearly and explicitly that indeed, to answer our question, a person can, yes, positively put a pot next to a stove that was not done gufa ketuma, next to the wall of the stove,